Manish is wisely pointing out. These were things they wanted more information about. They had more questions about an email sent on January 5th from Mr. Meadows in which he indicates that the Guard would be present at the Capitol to, quote, protect pro-Trump people. So, you know, Frank, if you go back in time, I mean, by January 5th, there was I mean, Homeland Security officials, I mean, everyone knew who was going to be there. And there wasn't a lot of contemporaneous reporting that there would be counter-protests. All of the reporting was that Donald Trump and his campaign had via text, rally appearances, emails, and other organizing methods imported his people to the Capitol to fight. And Mike Flynn and Rudy Giuliani and all the folks that we talk about all the time dressed in some bulletproof garb. You know, there was so much, in hindsight, awareness of the potential for violence. But what's should never be normal is that on January 5th, the White House Chief of Staff indicated that the Guard would be at the Capitol to, quote, protect pro-Trump people. What about the people who they were attacking? Frank.
Is that for me, Nicole?
Yes.
Yeah. I want to speak from my experience in major event security, from securing a G8 summit during my career to multiple Olympic Games. You can't do both. You can't secure the threat while you're securing the target of that threat. So any notion now that you've played this clip in May, so we heard it in May, now we've been hit over the head with it again with regard to Mark Meadows' communication. And I think Americans who are generally attuned to things going the right way, the system, the process, the rule of law, maybe glossed over the May testimony and now need to get hit over the head with it. But that blow to the head has just come. Let me assure you, you can't do both. You can't say, well, the Guard's going to be on call to protect the protesters when you're watching the fact that there's violence coming. You know it's coming. You know there's no counter-protest planned. You can't do both. You need to protect the target from the threat. The target was the United States Capitol and the peaceful transition of power in a presidential election. That's the way this works. We've been hit over the head with the truth about what the National Guard was going to be deployed for, and it is a subversion of our military. Make no bones about it. I have been measured. I have been careful. I'm an evidence guy, but I'm now seeing the evidence, and this was an attempt to subvert the military for an authoritarian purpose. That's not good. Secondly, we've got Mark Meadows now from the supporting document from the Select Committee. We've got him communicating with DOJ about finding the fraud, not while there's a legit concern that there's election fraud, but rather after DOJ has said, can't find any. We were all over it. We looked for it. It's not there. After that, he's saying, no. You need to find the fraud. So we've got a guy who now is being placed at the center of not only the big lie, but the violence on January 6th. He is becoming a major player, not a peripheral player.
You talked about protection from a threat. I've always wondered if the White House Chief of Staff was directing the Guard to protect Trump supporters. They obviously knew there was no threat in Washington to Trump. I mean, the Secret Service did not hesitate to rush Donald Trump down to the PIAC to protect him when there were protests in Lafayette. There's no heightened security. Donald Trump was out at an open-air event at the election. There's no threat to Donald Trump. No one was worried about Donald Trump's safety because they knew who was going to be there. There was no question that Trump's supporters might be in danger, was there, Frank? Or if there was a question that his supporters might be in danger, wouldn't there also have been a question about White House security, about Trump's security?
Right. What we saw with regard to the behavior of Secret Service that day seems to me an anomaly from standard operating procedures. And I think we need to, if the committee hasn't already behind closed doors, we need to hear high-ranking senior Secret Service officials during that time explain what was going on and why the president was not put in some bunker or in the basement or moved outright out of the White House. Why Vice President Pence was allowed to remain in that setting, highly volatile setting, and why reportedly Vice President Pence said something like, I'm not getting in that vehicle. Think about that. A Secret Service-driven vehicle, and allegedly the Vice President is hesitant to get in it, that is his lifeline. We've got to dig into that.
Charlie, the right does a good job at, I'm trying to think of a TV-friendly word, at covering over, papering over legitimate questions to make it sound like, ooh, people fretting about the insurrection. It wasn't as deadly as 9/11. What's the big deal? The big deal is this. According to the contempt report, Meadows was in contact with some of the private individuals who planned and organized the January 6th rally, one of whom reportedly may have expressed safety concerns to Meadows about January 6th events. Meadows used his personal cell phone to discuss the rally and that in the days leading up to January 6th. Meadows exchanged texts with and provided guidance to an organizer of the January 6th rally on the Ellipse. After the organizer told him this, quote, "Things have gotten crazy and I desperately need some direction. Please." Now, we know from the committee subpoenas who the organizers were. They were folks associated with the most extreme elements and groups in American politics. And the White House chief of staff, whose salary is paid for all of us, was giving them direction. It's unbelievable, Charlie.
You know, I want to go back to two words that you used in your setup. You said this was stunning and it was shocking. And, you know, you and I have been talking about this gang for the last 5 years. And you'd think that by this point we couldn't be shocked by anything. That there's nothing that would be amazing. And yet what we're learning now about this whirlwind of crazy at the very heart of the White House, the chief of staff to the president of the United States involved in this. To what extent, you know, we're not sure. It is one of the great ironies of history that Mark Meadows is undermining the cover-up that he would normally be, you know, at the center of. But we are now finding out exactly how serious they were, the extent to which the men and women in the White House betrayed their oath of offices, did not understand the role of the military, and spent time consorting with some of the craziest conspiracy theorists in the country. And it's interesting to me that Mark Meadows, who obviously is responsible for this document, is apparently willing to have this criminal contempt of Congress, more willing to do that than to risk testifying in front of Congress, where he would run the risk of perjuring himself and of being excommunicated from Trump world. That he's at the point right now where he would rather be criminally charged with contempt of Congress than have to sit and tell the story. And to Yanisha's point, if there's one thing that's obvious, is that this is exactly the role of Congress in its oversight. This is exactly the sort of thing that the American people need to have investigated as thoroughly as possible. And anyone who took an oath of office of the Constitution should want to cooperate with. And one more thing, Nicole, I'm haunted by something you said a couple of weeks ago, that you know, we're talking about being hit over the head and seeing all of this. You asked the question, but will it make a difference? Will it matter? Will this change public opinion? Will this cause Republicans who have gone along with everything else to change their minds? And we honestly don't know. But I'm not totally optimistic about that.
I want to respond to a couple of things. So I said to our team today at 2 o'clock, I said, I keep wanting there to be a day when what these people did to this White House that I had the privilege of working in and revered, for not to shock me and gut me and cause me to feel despair. And today is not that day. I am disgusted by reading this 51, and I read off 51 pages. I have not given viewers of this program homework since the Raffensperger transcript came out, but I implore you to read all 51 pages to understand who was running the White House, who was running the kind of person that would run Donald Trump's White House. My question for you, Charlie, is two. One, I think that a criminal contempt charge might be the least of Mark Meadows' future legal problems, don't you?
Well, it ought to be. I mean, if what we are seeing here, and I think that what we are seeing here is a detailed attempt or an undertaking, a conspiracy to overthrow the legitimate, fair, and free election of the President of the United States. There has to be some sort of legal consequence to that. And, you know, I'm not one of those who is, you know, willing to drag the Attorney General every day. But at some point, the Department of Justice has to look into this and say, are we dealing with just with the people who entered the Capitol, but what about the people who orchestrated it? What about the people who lied to them? What about the people in these meetings that set this train of events that resulted in January 6th? There seems something seriously wrong when it's the foot soldiers who are going to prison, but the Mark Meadows and the Donald Trumps of the world so far face no criminal charges.
Yamiche, I'm reluctant to say that this way, but I'm just going to do it. Liz Cheney is a sort of vocal supporter of the entire architecture of post 9/11 foreign policy. Highly unpopular, I know, with most viewers of this program. But my question is about what I'm seeing in sort of shards and threads from the weekend. Meadows reportedly balked when he found out they were looking for phone records. They're not looking, I mean, the Congress isn't the NSA. They don't have like tapes. They weren't listening to him. It's metadata. They suppose he calls in and calls out. That's what makes Meadows balk. Liz Cheney is not going to stop at Ali Alexander. Liz Cheney is going to go to the root of the threat to democracy. And the way Liz Cheney stays a Republican is she views the threat as separate from Republicanism. And that may be right or wrong, but she views Trump and Trumpism as the threat, as the criminal actors. And I wonder if you can sort of speak to what's in this report and what is clearly a newly aggressive posture from the 1-6 committee going up to and including Mark Meadows.
Yeah, I mean, what you see from lawmakers is them looking at this insurrection and saying, we have to understand who the players were. We have to understand how these foot soldiers, these people that we actually saw break into the Capitol, how they actually got the messaging, the funding, the confidence to feel like they could try to overthrow an election. And I also think when you look at this and you look at sort of Mark Meadows balking at the idea that people want to see his phone records, one thing that's in this report that I think is very important is that Mark Meadows was communicating with people not only through official White House channels, but also through private channels. So it's who are you texting? Who are you emailing on other servers that aren't the White House servers? I mean, that's sort of the information that I think people, especially lawmakers, want to get at. And it's the sort of information that's going to be illuminating, because maybe when you're planning to overthrow the election, you don't do it just on your government email. You might want to do it on in a text message. And to me, the biggest questions, the questions that we still don't know the answer to, are what were they actually saying? Not just watching the TV during January 6th, but what were they actually saying? Who was Mark Meadows texting? Who were they calling? What exactly was the president saying? Not just sort of the vagueness that we have now, but I think lawmakers need to and want to get to the bottom of exactly what was happening in that West Wing while they were all of this was happening, while American democracy was under attack. And I should tell you, you made one other point that I think is very important, and that is who was really at risk on January 6th. I was on the White House lawn. We were sitting in a bubble of security. It was quiet. It was in some ways surreal, because I was watching the live feed of the Capitol and thinking, oh, well, things are going to get crazy here. And that was exactly the opposite. The birds are flying. Everybody was chill. People were calm. People were, of course, shocked by what they were watching on Capitol Hill. But there was no sense of real threat at the White House, especially among staffers that I talked to. And it was because in some ways they understood who the threat was and who these people were that were carrying out the violence that we were watching on TV.
It's just amazing, and it's anecdotal, obviously, but it's just amazing that, not a mile and a half away, they were engaged in what the Capitol police officers called medieval hand-to-hand combat, worse than what some of them had seen in combat, in fighting wars. It's amazing. I feel like we're at the beginning of the beginning, and trying to put our arms around and understanding what happened. Charlie Sykes, thank you for being my partner in this journey, and for starting us off. Yamiche and Frank, stick around. When we come back, our colleague Ayman Mohadeen joins us for a closer look at what drove an otherwise unassuming American, and Americans more broadly, to attack the Capitol on January 6th. His latest episode of the podcast American Radical connects the dots between online radicalism and the disgraced ex-president's lies about the election being stolen from him. That is next. Plus,